tonight we'd like to have the head of the Sons of the Union Veterans of the Civil War, and the son of one of our veterans, Floyd Denman. David, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you.
Present arms. The United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Order arms.
Okay, Charlie, take this next month. First of all, for those of you who don't get notification, two. Sending in reserves.
I think the actually does that.
Okay, for those of you who would to get notification of our meetings who aren't getting them, either by email or by postcard, these are available out back. Fill it out, and you will get notification. That simple. Now, I know we have some first-timers in the house. I've got a few this evening. First-timers? First-timers? Look at them all. Yeah, really good. Okay, I'd like you to introduce you to our World War II veterans who will raise their hands at this point. So you know you're in good company. And by the way, this is National Military Awareness Month. So let's be aware of their veterans of other engagements as well. Korea, Cold War, Vietnam, and Bill Jackson's Civil War. Everybody who served, raise your hands, please. Wow. That's a good group. Yeah, it is National Military Awareness Month, and Armed Forces Day is annually observed on the third Saturday of May. This year it's May 18th, and it's to pay tribute to men and women who serve the United States Armed Forces. It's also part of Armed Forces Week, which begins the second Saturday of May. One of our new directors, Patty Bowers, is here somewhere, I suppose. Patty? There she is. Patty made a heck of a suggestion that we take advantage of the opportunity for us to get our message out and let people know about the World War II Roundtable, and perhaps go out to Carlisle to the Army Heritage Days on May 18th and May 19th. It's a very large venue with an attendance of 6,000 to 10,000 people, and they'll provide us a table, we'll provide a tent. We hope we can get this put together, and so please come out and bring people and introduce them to us so that we can increase people's awareness of what we do. Next month's meeting is June 6th. Nothing special about that date, I guess. And it's just before the World War II weekend in Reading, so if you're not planning on doing that, plan to do that. I would remind you that if you come here next month to have supper beforehand, please call Bev Barton, whose name and number is on whatever information you get. Be aware that they have a website. It's kind of long, but all you got to do is Google Central Pennsylvania World War II Roundtable, and you'll get it. And most important, as you leave, especially your newcomers, pay attention. We have the helmet committee who will greet you at the door as you leave, and they'll be happy to accept your free will contribution, which helps us keep going. May was an important month for many reasons in World War II. In May of 1939, the Nazis signed the Pact of Steel with Italy and subsequently formalized with Japan. So they formed the Axis. 1940, the Nazis, a lot of things happened in 1940. The Nazis invaded France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of Great Britain. Holland surrendered to the Nazis. There was the evacuation of Allied troops from Dunkirk. Belgium surrendered to the Nazis. And so it went. In May of 1942, Japan captured the Philippines and Burma, having driven out the U.S., aka MacArthur, and Great Britain. 1943, things were turning. Axis troops in northern Africa surrendered. And finally, we fought through the war. And on Monday, May 7th, 1945, at 2:41 a.m., guess what happened? Let's not say the same hands. German General Euro signed the unconditional surrender document that formally ended the war in Europe. Now, Winston Churchill was informed of this at 7 o'clock in the morning, and no public announcements had made, but crowds were forming and things were going around. And people were saying, we want the king. And the British Home Office issued a circular before the official announcement came out, instructing the nations on how they should celebrate. Oh, how jolly. They said bonfires will be allowed, but the government trusted only material with no salvage value will be used. I guess there's a lot of stuff that didn't have a salvage value. But by the afternoon, there was still no notification, and it turned out that, ironically, the Germans had been told about it, but no announcement in Great Britain, because Joseph Stalin, who had other ideas of how it should be announced, had held it up, and he caused a delay. But by early evening, Churchill said, baloney with this. He announced he was not going to give Stalin the satisfaction of pulling up what everybody knew. At 7:40 p.m., the Ministry of Information made a short announcement. In accordance with arrangements between the three great powers, tomorrow, Tuesday, will be treated as Victory in Europe Day and will be regarded as a holiday. Well, within minutes, pandemonium break out. Great celebration, and they celebrated well into the evening until close to midnight when rain finally drove them off. And a lot of noise going on. May 8th, then, was the Victory in Europe Day. Celebration continued. The country went wild with joy. London was jammed with people. And 3 Lancaster bombers flew over London and dropped red and green flares. Did you sight some of them, Richard? No. So, that's about what I have for World War II. Now, our new resident president, Charlie Lloyd, will tell you about tonight and upcoming activities and speakers and tonight's program. Charlie?
Kurt, or as Chuck Klein calls you, Rick. I got you, didn't I? Yeah, we do have a new board, and I'd just like to take a moment to introduce the board members. I think I see some in the back there. Where are we here? Excuse me, Richard Burton, Secretary. I'm looking for Bob is in the back. You were high. I was looking for you. Bob Watkins is our treasurer. He's the real power guy because he holds the checkbook. You have to watch him. You got the check. And our new vice president is here, Terry Hartzell. He's an accomplished writer, editor, and he's brought some very professional things to our table, and we're going to have you, Terry. We really are. Thank you for that. And then we go to our directors. I can't read my own writing. That's the problem. You have to watch that, but I can do it. In the second row, we have Lars Paventa. You have to stand up when you're introduced because you're brand new. There you go. Laura's been helping us quite a bit. She's from the Lewisburg area, and she works with veterans up there. And our challenge now is to find World War II veterans, and she's been more than helpful, helping us locate veterans as we speak. We also have, where's Patty? You got to stand, Patty. There you go. Patty Rowers has worked with us. She actually is the head of the Scions, is that how you say that? Scions, sorry. The 17th Airborne. And she sets up all their national conventions, and she's been very, very helpful. In fact, Kirk and I have been to 2 of them in Lancaster, and they're really special. It's a big job, and we look forward to working with Patty. We also have, I forgot Chris. Where's Chris? He's not new, he's old. And Chris Huffman is our historian, and he's a student there. And I don't want to forget anybody here. Where's Mike? Oh my God! Mike Boy's on board. He's a Black Hawk crew member, and he's been coming to our meetings, and he's expecting to do a good job. Last time he was late, and I said, how do you get late to a meeting? He says, I'm 1 minute early, Charlie. I said, no, if you're an hour earlier, okay. He had to fly the Undersecretary of the Army to the Pentagon, land on the grass, and get back here in time. I didn't give him a hard time at all, believe me. You gotta stand, Michael. Oh, okay. I'll let you know for you. Well, did I miss anybody? Any questions? Oh my God! The guy that runs. Don't turn me off like that. If you ever saw The Wizard of Oz, he's the guy behind the curtain making all the smoke happen. So if he wants us to be quiet, he just shuts us off. Yeah.
I forgot to mention one thing on a somber note. Today, the 2nd, is National Holocaust Remembrance Day. We've had several speakers here that things to do with the Holocaust, that survived it, that reported on it, and so it's May 2nd this year. It was established by Congress as our nation's annual commemoration of the Holocaust. In Hebrew, Holocaust Remembrance Day is called Yom HaShoah, and March anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising during World War II. So, for those of you so inclined, happy Remembrance Day. That is all.
And in conjunction with that, thanks to Chuck Klein, who is Command Ship Wasatch, 5, 6, 7 landings in the South Pacific. I called him last night and I said, could you do me a favor? And he said, I'd do anything. I said, really? I said, yeah, could you call Linda Wagner for us? Linda Wagner, she's in Schwab, spoke for us about 5 or 6 years ago. And her family was a doctor. And they avoided the Nazis, they ran into the forest, and they actually lived in the forest for several years, and after so many years, she finally made it to this country. And her story is absolutely riveting. And I had her scheduled to come, what did you say, August? First week in August for Linda Schwab. We look forward to that. She was 6, yeah, I remember. It was a riveting story. 2 months ago, I went to see the tank down on 3rd Street, and that was rather interesting. We're talking to the people to bring the tank. I don't think you bring the tank. That's $2,500. But I bring the tank driver and the gunner, and expect to have him here in the next couple of months. And if you remember, at that time, one of our most loyal attendees was very, very ill in the hospital. And I happened to have that book signed by Adam Akos and also Mr. Moore. And I brought it, and you signed it. And we sent it to the fellow who was very ill in the hospital, Austin Woodwayer's here. He's back, and we're glad to see him back. I'm telling you, this wasn't the same if you weren't there. Welcome you back. In March, I went to a D-Day symposium at Gettysburg College. Not just me. Barb went. Who else went there? You were there. Terry was there, and it was it was an extremely interesting day. They had 4 doctors. They had George Colburn, Dr. Colburn. He's a filmmaker and historian, and he does documentaries. They're absolutely unbelievable. We almost had him come up tonight. He was supposed to be in D.C. and meet us, but I'd like to have him here for a further date. his D-Day, he has a bunch of them. The one I really liked was the code talkers, the Navajo code talkers, and I think that would be interesting for us to see. Also, Craig Simmons, Navy Commander, gave an excellent presentation. And John McManus, I don't know if we can afford him or get him, but he wrote the book The Dead and Those Who Are About to Be. And he was very interesting. In fact, someone asked him when he wrote that book, did you ever write about the other side, the German fighters, soldiers? And he said, no, he said, I wish I would have. And that took me back to our speaker tonight, a good professor, told us that he was going in August, I believe, to Poland and Germany to interview the German soldiers. So I mentioned this to Dr. George, and his eyes lit up and everything. He said, I got to meet this professor. So there's a synergy there we think that will help. He was trying to make it tonight. And the last person was there was, you might not recognize his name, Susan Eisenhower. And she's the head of the Institute, and she's the granddaughter. And I've talked to people down there to see maybe Susan could join us at some point in the future. She's very, very busy, but we're not going to stop working in that direction. I think I've got enough. We need to get on with the program. Our conversations with Steve started about 3 months ago, 4 months ago. Who knows, because you went to Europe and you went to the Pacific, you went all over the place. But back in January, I brought Hank Heim in to speak. You remember Hank? And I tried to use one of our films back in the olden days, Bill Jackson. And it just wasn't of the quality. And the professor said, don't worry, I have films of Hank from 10 years ago. It was totally different. It was much more cognizant, and the story was interesting. And the good professor and his wife Mary pulled me out of the hole. And that worked out quite well. So we thank you for that. Now we're at the point where we're going to introduce Steve and Mary. They've been doing this for 15 years, and they've been all over the place. They're actually tied into the University of Delaware. You're a classic archaeologist. You go dig holes. You were 2 months in Egypt digging holes, so I don't know about that. And Mary and him work together. And we're very, very excited to have them here to share their stories with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Steve and Mary Sidebothom.
So tonight, what we're going to do, can everybody hear me? Or is that, am I too loud? Is it okay? It's okay. Okay. I'm used to speaking without this to a large class, so I'll try to not be too loud. So just a little bit about the background of this. We started this, and I'm sort of going to plant questions. Okay, I'm going to leave things unsaid, figuring out, well, he needs to tell us more. And I'll leave that for the Q&A afterwards. So we started this 15 years ago, precisely on the 6th of June 2004 was our first interview. I'm not going to say any more. You can ask me how that happened later. And it snowballed after that. And we now, as of this past Monday was our last interview. It was number 326. And we have another coming up on Saturday, 327. Of course, hope to pick up more in the future. So if there's anyone out there, I'll just plant this now. If there's anyone out there, a number of World War II vets in the audience we have interviewed, but a number of you we have not, so we'd very much like to talk to you. Costs you absolutely nothing. We come to you, and at the end of the day, you get DVD copies of what we have done, and you're free to, of course, share that with anybody that you like. So what do we use these for? I teach a class. Even though I'm a classical archaeologist, I'm basically a Greek and Roman historian and archaeologist. That might be another question. How did they come into World War II? I'll leave that for later, too. See, I've sort of lost my train of thought. Yeah, I teach a seminar on World War II, thank you, which is based on these interviews, and it's called World War II Through Oral History. And we use these portions of these interviews in the class
to illustrate, you know, battles and so on and so forth. And when the students write their papers, their big research papers, they have to pick a topic. They're not allowed to use the interviews. They're not allowed to use the interviews as pure biography. They use the interviews as part of the larger picture, say the Normandy campaign or the dropping of the Italian bomb, or whatever the topic might be. So needless to say, with 326 interviews, it was very difficult to sort of winnow it down and decide what to show you tonight without going overboard. So we chose 5, both from the European and the Pacific theaters. They're all American. However, one of them did not serve in the American Army. He served in an SS division on the Eastern Front, fighting against the Red Hordes, as he calls them. So I think it will be very fascinating to see what he has to say about that. He was a fascinating individual. As I come up to these different guys, I'll be explaining a little bit more in-depth background about them as individuals. So with that, let me start. I want to thank you for inviting me and Mary to come and talk to you about a passion of ours. Mary's father served. Go ahead and you tell him.
Okay. My dad was in the 9th Air Force. He served in England during the war. He was a crew chief and a mechanic, airplane mechanic. And after the war, he worked at Republic Aviation on Long Island, building aircraft for the military. He would never sit for an interview with us. He just kind of brushed it off and said, "Oh, it'll be a very short interview. Nothing, you know, I didn't do anything special." And you know, it always kind of bothered me because I think every single person who served did something special. And you know, I would have loved to have heard his stories. You know, you get a little bit from, I get some things from my brothers, but I like to make sure that we try to get as many interviews as we can, you know, big and small, to get a better picture of those who served.
Yes, so please, if you're a World War II veteran, we want to talk to you, male, female. We don't, you know, you say, "I only served in logistics or support," that's fine. Without you guys, they couldn't have fought the war, won the war. So we're very interested in your stories. So if you know anyone, or if you yourself are a vet, please let us know. I've got the next 4 months free, except for 1 week, and nothing but interview you. So don't think that time, you know, oh, he doesn't have time. We do have time for you. Okay? You made time for us in World War II to do what you did. We certainly will make time to hear your story. So please think about that. Okay? So let us start. As I said, we had a hard time when we chose these 5 guys because they had some very poignant things to say. This is actual face-to-face combat with the enemy, whether you're in the skies or on the ground, whether you're in Europe or fighting in the Pacific. So these are simply little chunks of longer interviews. In one case, as you'll see, we interviewed one guy over 2 days and had 11 hours on camera with him. So let me start. You might want to know, how do we find the veterans? Well, you can see word of mouth. That's always great. Well, if someone says, "Oh yeah, my grandfather was in the military," and I'll say, "Hey, here's my card." Does he want to talk, or does she want to talk? We also, of course, local newspapers, such as the ones that I've seen tonight, are excellent sources, because they'll often say, "Oh, this guy was serving in Europe or the Far East or whatever." So it's often easy to track them down when these are published in hometown newspapers. Of course, you're all familiar with the Military the History Channel, and you all know how they work those programs. They'll, you know, pop up with a 2-minute thing of Joe Schmo or whatever. I'll jot the guy's name down, and if it's not Bob Smith or Bill Jones, usually you can find it if you work hard enough. So that's a source. And then veterans organizations, VFW Post, for example, in Honolulu, clued me into a guy that we interviewed in March. So they're very useful, the VFW and the American Legion. And then what do we do after we locate these guys, or think we've located them? Sometimes we have to write letters, of course, not knowing for sure whether this is the right guy. And on one occasion it wasn't, but it worked out very well. We can tell you about that later. So we write a letter of introduction. You see sort of a sample of that on the screen. You need binoculars to read it. And basically it's 1 page. Most people don't want to read more than a page, human nature being what it is. And so we stick everything in a page. We introduce ourselves. We say, "We'd like to interview you. Here's the history of our project. This is why we would like to interview you. Why you in the class," and so on and so forth. So if they answer that letter, we do not call first. Most people, if you were to get a call out of the blue from someone you didn't know, you'd hang up. That's what I do. So we send them a letter, and that way they've got time to check us out, or have a relative check us out. Is this guy legitimate? And then they usually call us. That's usually the way. Occasionally it's email, once in a while a letter, but usually they give us a call. And then from there, what we do after the initial telephone call, you're usually not going to call us to tell us they don't want to talk to us, okay? Although we did have that happen once. A guy called and said, thanks for sending the letter, but I don't want to talk to you. Okay, that's fine. But usually non-answer is the answer, and that does happen. But once we've got them on the phone, and we start to set things up with a date and a place, usually their home or their apartment. And then the next thing I try to find out from them is, have you written a book? Or has someone written a book about you? And then we get copies of that, I read them, I take notes on them, so when I go into the interview, I'm as well informed as I can be at that point about this particular individual. Some of these guys, for example, one of the guys you're going to see tonight wrote 4 books, and we'll talk a little bit about him. And then, of course, I use these notes that I type up so I can read them. And as I go through the interview, it helps guide me through the interview process. And then, of course, any relatives that are sitting in on the interview, they can chime in. Mary often asks questions as well. So when you hear the tape, when you hear some of the interviews tonight, you'll hear us sort of asking questions further. And we do encourage the family to attend, or relatives of any kind, or friends, because it often makes the veteran feel much more comfortable at ease with a stranger in his apartment or in his house. Plus, of course, the family and friends probably have heard the story so many times that, of course, they can prompt the veteran if he or she can't remember a story. So it's very useful all the way around to have a family member or a close friend in attendance. So once we've set all this up, then we have to make the travel arrangements, of course. And up through last year, we paid for all of these interviews ourselves. These came out of our own pockets, and we were more than happy to do it. We felt like for what you did, for what the veterans did for us, the least we can do is spend the time and the money to get their stories. Fortunately, starting about a year ago, I started to get some money from the university to help pay for some of our travel. So we had to set up, of course, the travel. And so if it's say a flight to the UK or to Belgium or to Poland or whatever, we of course have to set up for rental cars, planes, hotels, all of that, suitable location for the interview. Most of the interviews have taken place in these individuals' homes. And we prefer them because that's where they've spoiled away the photos and the documents that we would also like to see. But occasionally they want to have the interview in a neutral location. And that's fine too. And then who will attend, we just discussed a little bit about relatives and friends and so on. And then enough time. And this is something that a lot of veterans don't understand. They think it's going to be like a 15-minute or a 30-minute interview and that's it. And our interviews are extremely in-depth. And we like to say more so than the Library of Congress, because we interview them in 3 phases of their life. The beginning, where they were born, when they were born, what they do during the Depression, because that's when their personalities are formed. Then the war years, and we follow up with part 3 being, after the war. Did you use the GI Bill? Did you know about the 5220 Club? What did you do? So that's basically, in a nutshell, our interview process. And then, of course, Mary's the techie here. We have role reversal. I know squat about electronics because she has 6 kids. She's the electronic genius in the family. So she puts all this together. So we have our camera, our tripod, our still camera. We have our scanner. We have a computer laptop. So we scan things. We can scan the documents or the photos they show us right to that. And proper lighting is critical, of course, and anybody who's taken pictures knows that. I don't need to go into that. Background distractions, you can't imagine the number of Swiss cuckoo clocks going off. People like to mow the lawn, even in the rain, right when we start our interviews, right outside the window. Telephones, you name it, we've had it, and we have to tell them, please. People seem to think if I go in the kitchen, I can claim all the dishes I want, because if they can't see me, they certainly can't hear me, which isn't true. So that's a huge problem. And in post-production, what Mary does with the little computer card and the camera, she'll download it. We put it on DVDs. We get about an hour and a half of video per DVD, and we then send copies to the veteran. And of course, he or she is free to do with these whatever they want. And we, of course, encourage them to share with their families and friends and so on. So that's basically, in a nutshell, our project, how long we've been doing it. We've traveled to, I think, about 38 of the states. We've also interviewed in Canada, Great Britain, Belgium, Poland, and Malta, of all places. All the German vets we've interviewed have been in this country. So there's a number of German veterans from World War II living in the neighborhoods around the country. Unfortunately, less and less, but anyway. So what I'd like to do now is show you clips. You have to keep in mind, these are a few minutes long, and these we pulled from interviews that in many cases lasted many, many hours. So you're just getting a short bit here. There were others we could have used, but I didn't want to drag this on endlessly. Most people don't want to hear more about it than about 45 to 50 minutes. So the first man, and this is the latest one that we've interviewed that I'm showing you here tonight. You can read for yourself there. He was in the 29th Infantry Division in the 2nd Wave at Omaha Beach. So of all the interviews we have the closest time frame in which he's telling his story, around 7 o'clock in the morning, minus half an hour here or there, on June 6th, 1944. And of course, just a few photographs or paintings there to give you all know what happened there, and what a hell of a mess Omaha Beach was in those first hours of the invasion. So listen very carefully what Mr. McCarthy has to say. He's extremely emotional, and this clearly scarred him for life. He's been back since that day 14 times to Omaha Beach. And when we interviewed him in May, he was going to go back again. And as you'll see, you don't have to be a psychologist to understand when you see this man, what he has to say, what a huge impact this had on his life. So here is Mr. McCarthy recalling what he said to us a little less than 2 years ago about his experiences at Omaha Beach. Okay. This isn't working. There we go.
That was the last drive down on my life. I went down on the road down and then going down and they said the bird up on top and tell the window, take your hands, show you instruction. There we go. Take your hands now. They had the boats are moving up and down the way. You got a 6-foot draft in the water. So the boats are moving up and down. So you have to time it so that you don't get whacked. When the boat comes up with you, there's no landing job that this wooden steel.
So you want to drop when it's dropped?
You want to drop when they tell you to drop.
Which is when the landing craft is dropped.
Landing craft is dropped.
Right.
And that's what they're doing. They tell you that. They're going very easy on this. Very. 1, 2, 3. You're getting close. Get ready. Go.
Yeah.
And then you go and you let go and you drop down. There's 2 guys catch it. Within 2 guys catch it and push it over. They walk it right over. Now, bear in mind, my rifle was still up there. They haven't set it down. They shoot down at me and a thousand got the rifle. He's holding on my rifle. I didn't see it. I didn't take it with me going down. I'm just getting on the line going down. The cops takes me over to the starboard side of the boat. I put a little secret over the starboard side, and that's where he was totally sitting. We're all coming in together, but we're taking lots of water. I don't take my helmet off. That helmet stays on my head. I don't care if we put it down here. The helmet stays on my head. I'll somehow or another figure out it. I eventually finally took the helmet off. We have to use something to get the bloody water up. There's the water through our waist, and the boat is dragging me. We can't go too fast. We can't. The boat is full of water.
So you're bailing with the helmet?
We're bailing with the helmet coming in. But now how far can you bail? You can't bail that much. You're just lucky to get one shot out, and you have to say, yeah, I'll have to do this right. We're getting closer. Now we can see what's happening a little bit. And all of a sudden I see the top of the chest. That's the chest, baby. That's the chest.
So you knew that was
Oh, we knew that.
one of your objectives?
The rubber objective.
Okay.
We knew that. I knew that chest into the rotor.
So this is one of your...
The rotor, that's where we're coming in.
Okay.
And I knew that originally we're coming in a dog green. But the poor fellas coming in a dog green are getting slaughtered before they even get out of the boat. In the platform coming in, there were both matters, and a lot of it, and we broached. You know what a broach is?
Yes.
You know, the bow goes down, and the stern is up in the air, and the boat fills up with water, so that when it does go up, it's now full and it's a church. and she turned over the porch side, and she went over, and I'm on the starboard side, and I jump over the other side, and I'm in the water. When I tried to get up, I was able to get the inside portion of the LCA. I was able to pull myself up, and I didn't get myself up, because the guy tried to blind me. And I thought he was alive, and I'm yelling at him to do what I'm doing, to grab the run, and he didn't answer me. And on the way in, I said, "Gee, buddy, I gotta use this poor bastard. I gotta use him." And I reached out, I grabbed him, and I pulled myself out from under the boat. I grabbed the one that was about in the back, and I used him. Come in.
So you pushed him in front of you to get to shore without, he was acting in sand there, so to speak, floating in sand there.
That's what he did.
Okay. So what happened to your equipment? I assume either lost or dumped it.
The rifle went, the camera went, everything went.
Okay.
Everything had my belt, I had the belt up as high as I could get on my chest. And I'm trying to swim the best way dog path, that's the only thing I could do. Coming in right on one arm, holding him, so that he's acting a piece of float for me.
Right.
Coming in.
So was he acting, let me ask you, do you think he was acting more as a flotation device for you or as protection from enemy fire or both? How did you see his role for you? Or you were thinking this one, just saying he's going to help me get to the beach one way or the other?
I think protection. The machine guns were over our heads.
Okay.
So I didn't
So
worry.
that wasn't too much of
That
that.
wasn't a worry.
Okay. Okay.
My worry was getting through the water.
Not getting that drowned.
And I'm drowning. And the shelter going over is what they were. Remember now, there's a lot of other boats in the back. We're the first little boat on the shore. And some guys told me, and I grabbed this guy. I didn't know who he was. I kind of grabbed the guy's belt. He's pulling me in, and I'm pulling him in, and I dropped out the best I can. Finally, I touched him, and Jesus, oh my God, that's friends.
I hope you could understand that he was rather emotional, understandably so. And he had, of course, very interesting things to say later on about what he did after he arrived at the beach and so on. So as you can see, it affected him very profoundly. At the other end of the emotional spectrum, we have the guys who saw this as a very clinical type of operation. I go and I shoot the guy, and that's the end of it. It's like swatting a fly. And a good example of that is this man, Donald Burgett, 101st Airborne. He was in all the major operations that the 101st was in, and he dropped in Normandy, he was at Market Garden, he was at the Battle of the Bulge, and on into southern Germany. He's a fascinating individual because he had only a 10th grade education, but he wrote 4 books about his experiences. In the first book, we're sitting in his den interviewing him, and he said, I had no idea how to write a book, so I got one of those paper bags you get from the grocery store and had a pencil, and I just started writing on the paper bag. He said, I quickly realized that wasn't going to do it, and so he put a want ad in the newspaper, and he was willing to trade scuba gear, I don't know how he got it, for a typewriter. So he got a Royal typewriter, and he typed all 4 books on this, and he pointed to me, he said, the typewriter's sitting right next to your right side. That's a typewriter I wrote all my books on. Oh, that's great. So 10th grade education, but one of the books that he wrote was rated as one of the top best 5 books describing combat in the European theater. And as I said, I read all 4 of his books before I got there, and I'm glad I did. We interviewed him we have 11 hours on camera with him over 2 days. And he had an amazing memory. Mary can kick in here with his memory. It was just incredible. He remembered all of these details, which is exactly what we want. And clearly time was not a problem for him. He was willing to sit there as long. In fact, we had to cut him off partway through day 2 because we had to drive to another interview. So we certainly could have gotten more. But anyway, again, going through all his various stories, of which he has legion, and some are very graphic and explicit. We chose this one, which takes place sometime during the Battle of the Bulge, so it could have been any time after December 16th and through the end of January of 45. So we're not exactly sure, nor was he precisely when the incident he's going to describe took place. But we'll let him speak for himself. Oops. Okay, did I do something wrong, which is highly likely? Go back one more. Okay. There he is. Now I'm supposed to go forward. Hmm?
Look at one time.
When did you run into this German paratrooper before you got this bottle?
Oh, I went by that, that was in that fight.
Okay, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's when I was kind of getting over towards the right. And he, I saw him in a hole and he was bumped from ear to you. And so I raised up and I said, he's so close, I don't even, I wouldn't have did enough to him. And I said, I don't care what it is, I did, but this time I just turned on, bam, like that. Well, I missed him, I must have been pretty close to it, I missed him. And he swung back and he fired a shot at me. And it hit my chin strap and it flipped up, hit me under the eye at the same instant. So I thought the bullet had passed through my head.
Wow.
And so he was working his bullet. Well, I went down and I was stunned. I remember my rifle was out of my hand. I was like, just a few inches out. You can't, if you reach for it, you're going to get hit again. So I just watched him underneath my hood ribbon on my helmet. And he looked at me and finished, he had already worked the bolt. The Germans always, sure enough, they always, when they worked the bolt, they would pull the rifle back. And then they come back up with it. So he did that, and so he just closed the bolt, so there I am, the rifle I don't have in my hand. So I thought it's useless to try to hit it first. And so anyway, the German looked to his right real quick. He just went like that, and he saw something. And Lieutenant Borelli had his third platoon, and he was coming around our left flank. And evidently he had arrived, and this German saw the men going through the trees. So because all of a sudden he just turned and he fired, took aim and fired. And when he did that, I knew I had time, so I just reached out, grabbed my own one, brought it up, and I just fucked out. They took aim that time, and I shot him. I hit him right here, and hit him in the cheekbone, and come out through the hole right here. Well, at that time I was I turned 19, and I weighed 140 pounds. But I ran 2 or 3 steps to get to him, and he went down the floor just like that, folded up in the hole. So I reached down there, I grabbed him, and I came out with his friend, and picked him up with one hand, and I laid him on the ground. And I jumped in his hole, and I laid my rifle across his belly. And I saw 2 more Germans. There, some of the ground a little lumpy, and you see their head as they came moving over, and I fired him, got one out, saw the helmet go through the air. And so anyway, I saw this belt buckle over here. It was iron, so I took the belt off, and I put it on me. Now this is the belt buckle that I took off the German. I shot him at him first, and he shot at me. He shot at me first. He cut my chin strap. I fired and missed, and when he turned fired at Borelli's platoon, I shot him through the head.
You see, it's a very clinical description, very different from McCarthy. One of the interesting things we found, and this is a generalization based on only a couple hundred interviews, is that the country boys, the guys who were used to hunting and fishing and trapping and all of this, had a much easier time with this kind of approach to it than did the city boys. So again, there's a generalization, there's all kinds of exceptions to that rule, but he was from the backwoods of Michigan, so he'd done a lot of that type of trapping and hunting and fishing earlier in his life. Listen to what Herman has to say, if we can get this thing to work.
The Russian front was a war against two regimes who hated each other, right? Now, which one do you favor? The Reds? I don't think so. I'll go with the National Socialists, right? But we fought hard. We never gave up. We always, even, I'll be honest with you, even the last week of the war, we thought we still going to win. We did. We did. Because we've seen so many different pictures. What the Russians done up in Schleswig when they broke in, Schleswig up north there, how they treated the women and raped them and stabbed them and killed them and everything. That's what makes you hang on a little longer. We're going to win yet. We're going to win yet.
Well, you probably weren't given any information on what was going on in the Western Front either.
That's what hurt us. Every time they pulled a division out of us, we had to spread out further. That's what killed us. When you've got a division, it's got to take about 30 miles. You're pretty thin.
Yeah.
You're pretty thin. Pretty thin. But it was I don't know. I still think back about why did it happen? Why did the best man lose? Why? The best trained, the best gentleman soldier in the world lost the war. And a kind of evil regime. We fought hard, we fought clean, we fought dirty. All wars are dirty. You catch Pakistan in the back, try to kill you and shoot you in the back. What do you do with them? Women, men, farmers, you line them up, you know what you do to them? Take a flamethrower, set them on fire. You know how that smells, don't you?
No,
that
it's
smells.
not like that.
Yeah. But they earned it, they deserved it, right? What they do to our patrols, we'd see them laying out, they'd cut their arms off, their legs off, put them in a pile. Cut their intestines out, stick them in their mouths, take bayonets, take their eyeballs out. You see a lot of men around there. Patrols, men in uniform, that's unaccounted for. Out of uniform, I can see it, no problem. But a man in uniform, treated with dignity. Because he's fighting for his homeland, like I fought for my homeland too. We fought hard, never gave up, starved, froze, dirty, hungry, never gave up. Never gave up. Always thinking we're gonna see this through. Were we brainwashed? I don't know.
Yeah, that's usually what gets most audiences, that right there. He's got a Midwest accent, he sounds just like most of us. And as I said, he was very proud of the tattoos. You may know the SS put tattoos under the arms of their troops, and he was very proud of his service in the SS. And of course, one of the questions I'm hoping you ask is, how did he get back in the U.S. after the war, after having served in the SS? I'll save that for the Q&A. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to tell you. You're going to have to ask about it. Okay. Keep you on your toes and on the ball.
It's hard to keep a straight face.
Yes. So now the next one. Whoops. No, I don't want him yet. Okay. So the next one. All the ones you've seen so far, of course, have been European or Mediterranean, MTO, right? Mediterranean Theater of Operations, or European Theater of Operations. Now we're going to go to the Pacific. We've interviewed a number of people who served in all capacities in the Pacific: flyers, submariners, aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers. We've interviewed a number of individuals there. I've also interviewed one Japanese, but we're not going to show you his interview tonight. I wanted to show you this one. I think many of you have seen the HBO series The Pacific, and if you've seen it, you know at the very end of it, there's interviews with some of the actual Marines whose characters are represented in the show. And I was very lucky. I saw it, and we tracked down two of the characters. One of them was R.V. Bergen, Romus Bergen, who was in the 1st Marine Division. And we also tracked down Sid Phillips. who's a real character, who also served in the 1st Division, but earlier in the war than Bergen. Phillips had been in Guadalcanal, and Bergen came in later on. Bergen served, fought at Cape Gloucester, at Peleliu, which I think you all know was horrible, and also Okinawa. He was injured in Okinawa. Anyway, most people are not as familiar with the Pacific Theater, because it was huge, of course, didn't involve the same number of troops that has fought in Europe. And of course you couldn't. These small islands aren't going to contain 100, there's no room for 100 divisions, right? You room for a few divisions on both sides, and that's pretty much it, except in the Philippines. So Peleliu is part of the modern country of Palau. And you see on the Google Earth the little red dot there. It's due east of the Philippines, and many now consider it, at the time and now, as being a completely unnecessary battle. It was MacArthur convinced the powers that be that we should go in there and secure our left flank as we were moving westward to attack the Philippines. So that's sort of the background of the Peleliu campaign. We were just there in March. I'd always wanted to go, so we had the opportunity. There's nothing that replaces actually going and seeing the terrain for yourself and seeing how horrible the conditions were. So I'm actually not going to talk about Bergen and Peleliu. I'm going to talk about, although he has some very good stories about them, I'm going to talk about a lesser-known sort of sub-campaign of Peleliu, and that was the island just to the north called Nicosia. And if you take a look at the larger map on the right, you see Peleliu, and you see the little island to the north with the red box around it. That's Nicosia. It's separated from the mainland by only a few hundred meters. At low tide, you can actually wade across. We went across one day because Bergen, in his interview to us, gave us a very specific account of a pillbox on the island that he and his squad had to take. And we're pretty sure we found that pillbox. So I'm going to show you his interview, and first I'll show you him. That's the pillbox. We're almost 100% certain this is the one he describes in the interview, so I'll just go through it a little bit, and then you can sort of hook that up with the interview. He describes a fairly large bunker near the airfield. He describes how they fooled around trying to take it. This is also, by the way, in the series, The Pacific, but it's misidentified as being on Peleliu, which it is, it's on Nicosia. And they were fooling around. The bunker they thought had been cleared. It had not. Eugene Sledge said, I hear voices in there. I think it's not clear. And of course they stir up hornet's nests, as you will see. They bring a 75mm Amtrak up, blow holes in it, and then burn it out with a flamethrower. You can see the 2 holes left there, and you can see the residual effects of the flamethrower on the back wall. We're almost certain this has to be the bunker. It's the only one in the region of the airfield that has these large holes in it after they've been caused by a fairly large caliber shell. So we subsequently, the guys didn't know this, took us there. They knew where it was, they didn't know what it was, and we said from now on you have to call this place Bergen's Bunker. And I don't know if they're going to keep that name or not, but anyway, let me have Bergen tell the story himself. Unfortunately, he just passed away last month. He died on April 6th at the age of 96. He was from Lancaster, Texas. So, and he wrote a book. If you're interested, you might want to read the book. I can tell you more about it later on, about the genesis of his book. It's called Islands of the Damned, and it's an account of his experiences at Cape Gloucester, at Peleliu, Nicosia, and at Okinawa. Okay, so here's R.V. Bergen describing them attempting to take this bunker on Nicosia.
We hit the beach about 8 o'clock, between 8 and 8:30, I think. It was a little airstrip right across the end of the island. And the Corsair pilots were bombing and strafing. They would come in, and there was smoke and dust and all that kind of stuff. They'd come in and they'd dive into that. And they would stay gone so long, I think, oh my God, it's crashed about that time to pull out. We went in and we crossed the airstrip, went in, I would estimate about 200 yards, and I'm pretty good at estimating distance at that time. And there was a bunker there, and we asked Saunders came along, he was the gunny sergeant, and asked him, what about this bunker, is it clear? Yeah, it's clear. So we started setting up the guns and sleds up there, and said, break the sticks and up there, and I thought, must be cracking up somewhere, said the way. You damn what Saunders said, this Jack's in there, I can hear him yapping. So I used up the side of the bunker, along those fences there, stood that Jack with his face right up in there. I stuck my rifle in there, shot him right in the face. Then stuck the barrel down in between the bars and then empty drum. I saved it in there, and then I reloaded and emptied another one in there. And it come alive like you kicked a beehive. And I mean, they were excited. They were ever talking and going on. And I knew that there was a bunch. I didn't have a clue had any. I knew there was a bunch in there. So we messed around there for simply like 30 minutes, at least 30 minutes. And one or two of them had run out, we shot them, and we dropped hand grenades down the vent. And they shoot the machine gun out, and they had rifles and hand grenades and machine gun in there. And they stole hand grenades out, and had two men hit while one in seriously, especially left corner and John Redford got hit. And I thought to myself, hell, this could go on for a week, you know, and we'll fool around again, they go kill one of my men, it's sure as hell. So I told them to secure the place and not make damn sure that none of them escaped. So while I go back to the beach and see if I can't find a tank with a 75 on it, I went down and I found a down crack with a 75 on it, so I brought it back up. Also got Charles Roman, the flamethrower back on his back. Brought him up, and whenever he got up there, about 25 or 30 yards from the field box, I told him what I needed to do. I hold him for walking for with his flamethrower. And we wound up killing 7 Japs outside that tried to escape, and 10 on the inside. And after it was all said and done, Redford, I was leaving the back, Redford right behind me, and we went down in the bunker to make sure everything was secured. And there was one Jap in there still alive, and I shot him point blank with 45, and that was the end of the 17th Japanese.
That's a pretty good bunker. That's
It was a
it.
big bunker.
So how long did this whole action take? Would you estimate?
I would say about between 45 minutes and an hour. Lasted that long.
Like I said, this is one story, had a number of other interesting things on Pello about the Navajo. So anyway, as you see, the problem here is trying to pick and choose among the 126 interviews, and from those, which incidents do you choose? So there are certain challenges to anybody who's done oral interviews knows this. There are certain challenges to doing the interviews. The benefits are obvious. You get firsthand accounts of what these individuals experience. But there are challenges and there are pitfalls. I'll draw an analogy for you in just a second. Oftentimes they will chime in on the larger picture, the strategic objectives of the campaign or something, which they could not possibly have done at that time, especially being privates, corporals, sergeants, or whatever, even low-ranking officers. So what clearly happened here, they're not lying to you in some cases. What they're doing is incorporating later events of their lives into their earlier. We've all done that, as I'll point out in a minute. So a lot of them have done extensive reading after the war. Of course, they've had reunions, they've talked to buddies, and the things that they've read, the things that they've heard their buddies recount, has become part of their collective memory. So when they're telling you this story, they're not trying to, in those particular instances, they're not trying to fib. They're simply incorporating things that they've learned subsequently. These have become part of their collective memory. And the analogy I always use for those of us who've never been in war combat, included, is, for example, you think you know what happened to you when you were 2 years old. I can assure you, you probably didn't. You think you remember because your parents told you. That has since become part of your collective memory. And I think in many cases that's the analogy we have to use here. So those are some of the challenges and pitfalls. Sometimes it's very easy with some of the very detailed descriptions to say, okay, yeah, he really did experience that. But when he starts waxing about, Eisenhower's objectives or MacArthur's goal, he's sort of leading off into the area where he couldn't possibly have known this kind of thing at the time. When you use these as historical sources, you have to, of course, keep these kinds of things in mind. And sometimes they'll contradict themselves. If you notice the Bergen interview, he contradicted himself about who shot first. I think in those cases, it's just, in some cases, it's probably a memory lapse. I don't think anybody's trying to lie to us there. But you have to sort these things out. Excellent teaching tool, yes. But again, with the caveat that when you tell your students, most of these students are 19, 20, 21 years old. Sometimes they're a little bit older if they're graduate students. You have to tell them, okay, you have to warn them when they look at these interviews, because when they do their papers, as I said, we'll give them a complete interview, whichever veteran or veterans they need to write their paper. You have to give them a warning and be careful. Don't take everything at 100% face value, okay? You have to be a little bit critical, like you do with any historical source, written or otherwise, and apply a degree of common sense and skepticism to some of the things that they're telling you. Preserving the fact past, I think that's pretty self-obvious. These are great sources, and as these men pass, and all of the men that I showed you today are gone now, we're very lucky that we're able to meet them and to get their stories. And again, coming back full circle to what I said at the beginning, if there are any veterans in the audience, and I know there are some there that we haven't interviewed, or if you know any veterans, we're very keen to talk to them. And we don't pass judgment. It was very hard when interviewing Schmaltz-Reed, for example, not to try to jump in and say, don't you realize what you did was wrong? You try to remain neutral throughout these interviews and let them tell their stories. If you start passing judgment on tape with them, that's not a good thing to do. You let them tell their stories, you try to pull them out, to tell them whether they're good, bad, or ugly. That's the way it was. And so, anyway, that gives you very briefly a snippet of what we've been doing the past 15 years, and we hope to be doing extensively in the next couple of years as well. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you appreciate it.
Okay.
You asked for questions and answers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I planted some of those for you. So.
I got the mic, so I'm going to ask the first question.
Okay.
How did Herman get back to the United States?
Okay, that's a very good. We knew that question was going to come up. We suspect, but he never said anything. He didn't dwell on that. He came back through Canada. I suspect at that point in the war, he only arrived back, I think, in the 1950s.
Yeah, his sister was here.
And so they didn't really keep a close record on that clearly. And his son didn't know. I remember after he passed, his son emailed me and said, all I know, and we sent interviews to Herman, but apparently he lost them. I don't know what happened. Because his son contacted me and says, I understand you interviewed my father and that you have a record of it. Could you please send me a copy? He said, all I know is he served in the German army during the war. I said, sure, we'll be glad to send them to you. So we sent them to him, and I'm sure if he watched them, he was shocked because he didn't know from the email exchange.
He said in his email that his dad never talked about the war, probably because he was on the wrong side. Yeah,
so it was a fascinating...
Kurt, I have the first question back here.
How do you handle the fact of copyrights and allowing to use the information, that sort of thing?
Good question.
Do they try to, what are you going to do with it?
It's a good question. What we tell them in the cover letter that you saw an example of there, we said we only use these in obviously non-profit making situations such as this, in classes. We do not use these for commercial purposes. If we decide to do anything with these in the future, we will contact them or their next of kin to sign a release allowing us to use these for further purposes, whether that's for publication or whatever. And we have published one book, but that was with the permission of the widow of the man about which the book was written. So that's how we deal with that issue. In other words, we haven't had to deal with it so far.
Back there.
soldier who was in the Panzer Division. He was an American. How did he pass muster to get into the Panzer?
Exactly. I mean, we don't know. He came back through Canada sometime in the early 1950s, and apparently. Oh.
Because he was an American citizen.
Oh, I see. But see, that particular division, not just that division, other SS divisions were made up, in some cases, almost entirely of non-Germans, Western Europeans especially, that had been convinced that they were fighting against a red horde that was intent on destroying European culture, and that was the idea. So you would have the composition of some of these, almost the entire composition of these units made up of non-Germans. So the Germans would take anybody who wanted to fight on their behalf. There was a British unit that fought for the Germans in World War II. They weren't very useful, but they were an SS unit. So I don't think everybody fighting in the German army was German, and in some cases, I think you're familiar with Normandy. The Allies captured a number of Poles and Russians who had been faced with the choice after capture by the Germans of going to a horrible fate or fighting on the Western Front, and they chose to do that. So there were not huge numbers, but a sizable number of non-Germans who fought in German units for the Germans in World War II on both fronts.
On a side note, my dad was 101st Airborne, and he said when he was fighting Bastogne, the Bulge, he knew that the Germans were getting desperate because one of the tanks that they had captured was being driven by women soldiers from Germans. Question, what was the Germans' reaction when they realized the concentration camps?
Well, he claims that he didn't know anything about that. He claims he didn't know anything about some of the Einsatzgruppen, that went out and were sent in behind the regular troops, the regular Wehrmacht troops as they conquered Soviet territory. It was Einsatzgruppen that went out, of course, and massacred large numbers of Jews and others. And he claimed to us that he didn't know anything about that. But then we've interviewed, I think, 13 Germans so far. None of them knew anything they claim about the camps.
Well, also Hermann was captured, and at the end of the war, he was in a Russian camp.
Yeah. But I mean, he claimed that during the war he didn't know anything about it. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't follow up on that. Hermann, if you want to know what happened to him at the end, his unit was in Vienna, and towards the end of the war in April '45. And his particular unit was up against the Danube, and that was it. The Russians were right there, and his Feldwebel, the sergeant, said to him, he said, "Okay, guys, it's every man for himself. If you want to surrender, it's up to you. If you want to make a swim for it, but you're not going to probably make it, or you can surrender." And so he chose surrender. So everybody threw their pay books in the river. That was the first thing. You did not want to keep your pay book as an SS trooper and get captured. Because what the Russians would do, since it's a German efficiency, they would put the date and the place where you were paid. And the Soviets quickly learned to tie in the dates and the place of those pays with massacres that occurred. Right, so the first thing you want to do is get rid of your pay book. So that was the first thing they threw away. Their weapons were second. And he surrendered, and he spent 2 years in a Soviet coal mine and survived that and returned to Germany, and as I said, then returned to the United States in the early 1950s. Yeah, he went to construction business in Ohio with his sons, and apparently did very, very well for himself.
And I think he was still getting a pension from the Germans.
Yes, he was. He was still getting a pension from the German government. No, what you may not know is the soldiers who served in the German armed forces long after the war, if they're still alive, they're still receiving a pension from the German government. I don't know how much it is, but if you want to write me a check for any of that, I'll take it. Yeah.
Are you familiar with groups in the American Army in New York called the Fort Ritchie Boys?
I'm sorry, called the what?
Fort Ritchie Boys.
Fort Ritchie Boys.
Fort Ritchie, which is down in Maryland.
Oh, no, sorry. Who were the Fort Ritchie Boys?
The original Fort Ritchie Boys were Germans who had immigrated to this country and agreed to serve in the United States Army. And they were so successful in sabotage behind the German lines that Americans were recruited into it. My father was part of the second group of Americans.
Wow.
And he went over to Europe with 100 men and 13 came home.
Okay, wow. Is he still alive by any chance?
No, he passed away probably 15 years ago.
Just about when we kind of started. Yeah, well, Henry Kissinger served in a capacity not quite as exotic as that. in the U.S. Army during World War II. So, and of course, there's a number of, if you're familiar with the jet birds, the special OSS units that dropped in. So there were a number of OSS people who were serving, you know what the OSS is, Office of Strategic Services, formed under the CIA. They modeled themselves on the British SOE, Special Operations Executive. And they were often made up of non-Americans who would go in and risk their lives on behalf of the Allied forces, dropping behind enemy lines and engaging in those kinds of activities. So.
Anybody else?
Lady back, I just headed her way. I'm headed her way. You know, we never let Barb hold the microphone. But I have a question for her. You talked about Hank Hine today. Hank fell twice, broke his hip twice, and Barb follows up and catches it. How's it going? Other than that,
Hank Hine is very much alive and well, despite the fact that he's fallen twice since January, broken each hip separately. A group of my friends and I just went over and celebrated his 98th birthday last week. He was 98 on April 23rd, and I just spoke with him last night. And I try to call him every couple of days because he's not in great spirits, given the circumstances, but he's very, very much alive and well. So.
I've been a good friend of his for a number of years, that's why. You were 15, well, you were only 30 then, right? I remember. See something? What did you say?
What's it?
You had what?
No, I was just telling her, please give Hank our best next time we're speaking to him. I'm sorry? Give Hank our best the next time we're speaking to him. We haven't spoken.
I'm sure he will not remember us. I'm sure he's been interviewed so many times that he won't remember us, which is fine.
I actually encourage anyone who would like to send him several cards or anything, because he's really kind of down.
Make that a little more.
Okay. No, I was going to say, I encourage anyone who would like to call him or send him yellow cards or any kind of encouragement, because he's kind of down in the dumps going through this preparation process, and he needs a spirit lifted. So, and anybody who can call and go visit him or send him cards, please do. And if you want contact information, you can see me afterwards.
Or tell him about how much you were impacted by his interview.
Yes, the triangle L that you showed on B-17 under Herb's interview,
Right.
it sort of brings to light my uncle, great uncle, was part of the 381st Bomb Group out of Bridgewell in Essex, England, and he was one of the 31 men that hit the Isle of Man. There were 31 servicemen that died on the Isle of Man. That was the largest plane crash is for the island. But he died at 23, and I heard one of the board members does a Lewisburg, Lewisburg. His sergeant is still living. I'm going to go out and see him on Friday. He just took his 101st birthday. He'll be 102 in February. And when you talk about fate, he was the last to see my uncle alive.
Wow.
And I see my uncle through his eyes, and he's 102. And I'm going to see him on Friday before Memorial Day.
Okay.
I want to ask him if he'd be willing to give you guys an interview.
Well, that'd be great.
He's an inspiration. He really is.
We'll get a card from us before you go, and that way we'll have our...
Perfect. His name is Charles Donofsky.
Okay.
Charles Donofsky.
Hi. One question, the other is a comment. The question, I've interviewed a lot of combat veterans from World War II myself, and it's amazing. There's very few of them that will talk about actual combat, and when it comes to actually killing a person, taking them up. Did you find that they are a rarity, or were you able to get a lot of these?
Yes, it's a good question. It's a very good one. As I said, the country boys, I mean, again, this is a very, broad generalization. The country boys, people like Bergen and so on, who were from the country. We know that because the first part of the interview is, what did you do growing up? So we know that that's their background. They had less of a problem being graphic in their descriptions than some of the. You saw McCarthy went to pieces. Understandably, I'm not saying he shouldn't, but I mean, he went to pieces, but he wasn't made of the, he didn't have the same, obviously, psychological makeup. Oftentimes, when we interview them, they'll say, oh, for example, we interviewed another guy, a guy named, remember the guy in Virginia, Hobbs, 29th Infantry? Yeah, Mills Hobbs. He was 29th Infantry as well. And he described coming off Omaha Beach, and of course the German snipers were everywhere. And apparently the sniper saw large numbers of men funneling through this area. He only shot the lieutenant who was holding a map. So, that sort of cured guys that wanted to wear their insignia. And he said, I said, well, what did you do with the sniper? He said, we took care of things. That's all he said. He wouldn't say any more than that. He took care of things. So you can use your imagination of what that meant.
I would like to respond as well. I think part of it is that we do start the interview with their early lives, their early years, and I think it has the effect of sort of relaxing them a little bit. So they kind of get more comfortable with talking and speaking, and then you kind of get into the more years, and often they'll just keep going with the narrative, and they'll be willing to speak up a little bit more. There have been some veterans that just can't go there. They just can't, and we don't push because they still have that trauma, and they just can't talk about it. They're gonna come.
Although where we really want to story, for example, we interviewed a man once who'd been roommates with General Eisenhower's son at West Point. So obviously that's a connection. We really wanted to get more information. And he said, I'm not going to talk about that. And I thought, you got to get him to talk about it. So it was very easy, actually. I maneuvered around and said something, and he just, boom, everything came out about Eisenhower's son at West Point. And so, in those situations, once in a while you sort of try to prod and poke a little just to see if, and after 2 or 3 times, if they, then you say you drop it. Yeah, we've had certainly run into a lot of ones that are reluctant to go into any details at all. They like to dwell on the funny stories that happen, the Liberty in Paris, which they suddenly can't remember. But interestingly enough, when we have family members there, a lot of the family members, of course, have heard these stories countless times. Once in a while, the veteran will say something, and the family member will chime in and say, I never heard that story before. So I'm not sure if sometimes they're more comfortable talking to total strangers than to their own families, or not. I don't know what prompts these things. But yes, so we've had the reluctant side, but as you can see, we've also had the ones that were more than happy to tell us very graphic things. I didn't show you some of the other things Bergen had to say, or that Bergen had to say, but they were just as graphic, or probably in the case of Bergen, even more so.
The other, I was fortunate to spend 20 years in Germany, and I used that to interview all sorts of German veterans. Fortunately, I'm fluent in German. Everything from Luftwaffe aces to U-boat sailors to Waffen SS, and also the Black SS.
Okay.
Allgemeine SS.
Okay.
But in 1994, I was privileged to be a commemoration officer for the 50th anniversary of D-Day. I was there at Utah Beach, and one of the most poignant episodes I got to experience. Are you familiar with the 90th Division in Normandy?
Yeah.
Well, you know how they get, obliterated practically.
Yeah.
They come in on the 2nd Division at Utah Beach. So one of my jobs was to more or less be the escort officer for the German veterans that were participating at the time. And there was a reunion of the 90th Division, and we were at a town of Perry, which had been liberated by the 90th Division. And we had German, they were from the 6th Parachute Regiment. If you know anything about Normandy, you'll know that they were one of the key units at the 101st encounters at Carentan. Anyway, I had gone off to see a Frenchman, and so I come back to the beer tent, I'm trying to find these guys. And I said, they're over there in the corner. Now, I grew up in an American Legion. And so the thing about associating with these German veterans, after a while, it seemed to me like the only two between them and the guys I knew were that they spoke German. That camaraderie among veterans and anything. Anyway, I go over to the corner, and here's a group, and I find the German guy I'm looking for. He's a Knight's Cross awardee. That's the one you wear around your neck, equivalent of a Medal of Honor.
And he's sitting there with these 90 veterans. And the one guy, he spoke, and the Germans spoke a little bit of English, but the American is gotten like this, and he's crying. And he says, "Look, you got to translate this, what I want to tell him." "What is it?" He said, "Now this German paratrooper, he had been awarded the Knight's Cross for wiping out an American battalion. You know, when the 90th attacks that hill in the breakout of Operation Cobra, it gets surrounded and cut off, and he was the sergeant that went in. After they shot up a lot of these guys, the Americans had no more ammunition, they surrendered. And he was one of the ones that was captured, became a German POW. But what he wanted me to tell this guy was, look, you saved my life. If you hadn't taken me prisoner, I know I would not have survived the war."
You should be the next speaker up here. Did you, now just a question for me, did you videotape those? How did you conduct those interviews?
Later on, I go back
Okay.
and handwritten notes. No, I had none of that. Oh, you mean my other one?
Yeah, did any of those guys, or do you stay in touch with any of those guys?
A little while. I'm working on a German case. I'm trying to match his claims against American laws.
Okay.
I interviewed a lot of people at the Chosen Reservoir.
Okay.
Navy and pilots, that sort of thing. What I found was, what happened was, they would tell you a lot of stuff after they found out you were more interested in it than they were.
I was just wondering how many women you've interviewed, and if so, how do their experiences kind of differ from that?
It's a great question. We've interviewed Russian female truck drivers, sure, the Red Army. We've interviewed a number of American women. We have 3 who served in the OSS during the war. They had some great stories. And what was interesting about these 3 women is they did not know each other during the war. All 3 ended up retiring in the same retirement home, which is in Virginia where they met. So it was really great. They're the same home. So wow, this is easy, boom, 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 you do the 3. So we have the 3 OSS ladies. One served, two served in Europe, and one was in the China, Burma, India theater. And then we've interviewed a number of nurses. One nurse helped. Yeah. And she helped recuperate some survivors of one of the concentration camps. So we don't have nearly the number of women we would like, although I have interviewed some code breakers that served in the Navy and so on. Very interestingly, FYI, we had lined up, and we had to postpone it, an Australian vet who lives in Colorado, of all places. We're going to try to figure out how he ended up there, who served in the Australian 6th Infantry Division. He's the only person we will have interviewed who fought against all 3 major Axis powers. He fought against the Italians in North Africa. He fought against the Germans in Greece and Crete. He fought against the Vichy French in Syria. And then the 6th Division was called back to the Far East and fought against the Japanese in New Guinea. So, and to make it even more interesting, he married a woman who was served in the British Army in Cairo. And so we're going to get 2 for 1. We're going to add another woman to our collection, and we'll add an Australian. So stay tuned for that.
I can chime in too. We did interview a couple of women, the Levitsky sisters,
right,
in Lower Delaware, that were nurses. I think that one of the key things that I noticed with a lot of women is they do focus a lot on like a sense of humor. They tell you a lot of funny stories, like how they accidentally set fire to the tent while they were trying to heat up some brownies, things like that. The OSS woman told us a story that they were trying to get these messages to these people who were either POWs or stranded somewhere, and there was water nearby, but they couldn't get to them overland. So they were going to send in a submarine, and they had to figure out a way to get these messages to them. So they decided they were going to put the messages in blown-up condoms, make balloons out of condoms, and release them from the submarine, and they would float up to the top. So she said, "You can't imagine the look I got on the doctor's face when I went into him and asked that told him I needed condoms." So he's like, "Here you go." "Oh no, I need 500." She just looked at her with this look of amazement.
She was the OSS lady who had served in the China, Burma, India. She was fascinated. She'd written a book called Undercover Girl. And And she had actually been at Honolulu on December 7th. She'd been a newspaper reporter for one of the Honolulu newspapers. And she ended up joining the, she was a character. She lived to be 100. She died a few years ago. But her book is called Undercover Girl. So if you're interested.
We also started with Julia Child.
Oh yeah, tell them the Julia Child story. This is classic.
Yeah, so she was friends with Julia Child. They were both in the same area. And so when the war was over, she said to Julia, "So Julia, what are you going to do now that the war is over?" She goes, "Well, you know, I've always wanted to write a cookbook." And she goes, "Oh, nobody's going to want to read that." Luckily, Julia didn't listen.
No, so we would definitely like to have more women.
Yeah.
And if you know of any, you know, we'll make a beeline for them.
I want to take this opportunity. Oh, I forgot, speaker next month is Joe Drake, 2nd Ranger Battalion, Normandy through Czechoslovakia. I think you'll find him very interesting as well. Sorry to interrupt that.
That's fine.
I have to thank you so much for coming all this way, 90 miles, and so wonderful, wonderful presentation. We really, really appreciate it. Don't go away. Eric's got more work to do here.
In true military fashion, you know, military likes to give out awards, certifications, medals and such. We try to do one better.
Okay.
We hope you'll take these in good spirit. Our highly treasured World War II Roundtable folks.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlie, for bringing these people. You're doing a horrible job, Mr. President.
Okay.